Opening verses of Revelation chapter 8, and they were concerning the silence in heaven, the angel gathering in the incense on the altar, and those being the prayers of the saints, and then hurling that fire back down upon the earth, and just meditating upon that scene in heaven of the angel taking the prayers of the saints. Such awful things have been happening on the earth, even at this point. And then this silence in heaven, and then you have the ushering in of the prayers of the saints. And an image popped into my mind about these prayers and all that John has been seeing going on. And what has he been seeing? A brightness and a rainbow, and in that is the one who sits upon the throne, high and lifted up. He hears these thunderings and these voices and this lightning. He hears all of these millions upon millions of people praising, and it's just from one side of heaven to the other, there's just this loud sound and excitement going on. And the image that popped into my mind was, and I want you to imagine this with me. Imagine that you're at a celebration that's in your honor, a genuine celebration, and people are coming up to the podium, and over the PA, they're talking about the good things you've accomplished. They're praising your attributes. And every time someone says something, the whole audience, they burst out into praise. And they're saying, here, they say, here, and and it's just, the whole thing is just caught up in excitement of people celebrating you. And then, which, some of you are going to have to stretch your imagination here just a little. But in all of that sound and that clapping, that praise, and that all that people lauding you, you feel this tug on your finger. And you look down, and it's your little child. And when you look at your child's face, tears are just streaming down their face. And they tugged on your hand. What happens at that moment to all of that loud praise? All of that applause that's going on. All those people saying, here, here, way to go. It all fades into the background as you kneel down and your child gets your undivided attention. And imagine what's going on here in heaven. All that we've seen, all that we've heard that John sees. And then here come the prayers of God's little children. And God gives His full attention to those prayers. That was kind of neat to me to think about that. The angel then takes these coals and casts them down in the earth. I want to assign some scriptures. Who will read Ezekiel chapter 10 and verse 2? Okay, Brother Gilbert. Who will read Isaiah chapter 6 and verse 6? Okay, Gwenda. Who will read Exodus chapter 9, verse 24 to 25? Brother Lynn. Who will read Exodus chapter 7, verses 19 through 21? Okay, Sister Naomi.
7, 19 through 21.
Chapter 7, verses 19 through 21 of Exodus. Who will read Zephaniah chapter 1, verse 3? Okay, Sister Saber. You know where Zephaniah is, right, don't you?
Zephaniah 1, 3 is what you said?
Chapter 1, verse 3. If not, Brother Leon knows exactly what Zephaniah is. Okay, I think that's all for tonight. Okay, and speaking of the coals on the altar, Brother Gilbert, read Ezekiel chapter 10, verse 2.
And he spake unto the man clothed with linen, and said, Go in between the wheels, even under the cherub, and fill thine hand with coals of fire from between the cherubims, and scatter them over the city. And he went in my sight.
Okay, and then this vision that Ezekiel has is very, very similar to this vision that John has, because the coals that are spread out over the city of Jerusalem are also judgment, the judgment of God. Okay, Gwenda, read Isaiah chapter 6, verse 6.
And one of the seraphs flew to me with a live coal in his hand, which he had taken with tongs from the altar. With it he touched my mouth and said, See, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away and your sin atoned for.
Okay, and this was in Isaiah's vision where he says, Woe is me, for I'm a man of unclean lips. And the angel takes the tongs and takes a coal off the altar before God and purifies his lips. And so in these we see that this altar that's before the Lord, that it is a purifying and a purifying element for the saints. It's an element of judgment upon the rebellious and wicked. When the prayers of the saints come up, then the altar, the incense is taken and cast back to the earth. And H.B. Sweet makes this statement: the prayers of the saints return to the earth in wrath. That's an interesting statement, isn't it? That the prayers of the saints return back to the earth in wrath. You know, God hears the prayers of his children that are oppressed. You know, if there's one thing that we don't want to do in this world, we don't want to offend widows or orphans.
Man,
Because they can appeal to God. And their prayers can go up to heaven and come back to earth in the form of the wrath of God upon people who oppose them. Wives, children, people in churches. All along this time, people that are oppressed, who are trying to follow God, have the right to appeal to God for his intervention, for his vengeance upon people who are hurting them, for his, and I've told you the story before about the guy one time in church that I thought he and I were so at odds with each other that I prayed, Lord, you're going to have to kill him. And the Lord said, well, I'll answer your prayers. Or the Lord said, well, I'll see that people pray for you what you pray for others. And I had to say, Lord, just forget that. That's not really what I meant to say. Because if I had, and I was serious at the time, but I didn't mean that. I meant that one of us had to go. I mean, for the sake of the Lord's work. But the Lord showed me that neither one of us had to go. That we could learn to be friends instead. We did. We became best friends. But
change hearts than this guilty person.
well, it sure is. Yeah. If we're willing to humble ourselves, it is. And that's what the Lord was teaching me in the whole lesson anyway, was to humble myself. But the Lord showed me that, those prayers that go up, they come back. And we have to be careful about what prayers we send up, because we might not actually like the form that they come back. And so, but the saints and it's my opinion that the prayers of the saints here in Revelation 8 are saints they're the people that when God answered the saints in the sixth seal that had been martyred, and they said, how long before you avenge us? And the Lord said, well, there's still some time to go. There's still others that are going to have to die like you died. And I think it's those saints whose prayers are going up to God because they're being persecuted and hounded and tormented and tortured. And they're praying. And so God, in answer to those prayers, hurls this fire back down upon the earth. Okay, that kind of In verse 6, and the seven, chapter 8, verse 6, and the seven angels which had the seven trumpets prepared themselves to sound. We mentioned a little bit last week about who these seven angels are. Some scholars believe that these seven angels are seven archangels. Now we only know of two archangels that's recorded in the Old Testament, New Testament. Somebody tell me, anybody know what their names are?
Michael and Gabriel.
Michael and Gabriel. In some of the Jewish literature, like in the Tobit, the book Tobit, it mentions seven archangels and lists them by name. In fact, in the Tobit, the names that it gives are Uriel, Raphael, Raguel, Michael, Sariel, Gabriel, and Remuel. Now, where they come from, who knows? Whether that's how it is, who knows? We don't really know where those writings come from with the names of the seven archangels. We know there's two. For all I know, there might be 20,000 archangels. But we know for certain there's two. Michael and Gabriel. Michael is the warrior. Gabriel is the messenger. But there were seven angels, and they prepared, each one of them had been given a trumpet, and they were preparing to sound their trumpet. Now the trumpet sounds, the seven trumpets parallel the seven seals in this way. And the seven seals, the first four were grouped together as the four horsemen of the apocalypse. And then you had the last three seals were of a greater devastation, you might say. The trumpets are the same way. The first four trumpets are linked together, and then the last three are of a greater devastation. In fact, the last three trumpets are also known as the three woes, and that's because of the increase of the devastation of those trumpets. These first four trumpets are going to speak of an assault by God's judgment on the four basic areas of nature as seen by a person in John's day, and probably to some extent in our day. And the four areas of nature that are going to be assaulted are the land, the sea, the fresh water, and the celestial bodies, sun, moon, stars, and that. And to a large degree, that's still what we consider nature. Land, sea, fresh water, and then outside of our atmosphere. In three of these, the first three trumpets, fire is going to be a part of all three of them. Because what did the angel hurl to the earth from off the altar?
Coals of fire.
The angel hurled fire upon the earth, and these first three trumpets are all going to have to do with fire. Now, up to this point, let's look at what we were observing as they're preparing to sound these trumpets. There has been thundering, lightning, voices, and now there's going to be fire hurled out. The imagery of what's going on here in Revelation is the same imagery as what took place on Mount Sinai when God came down and met with Israel and gave Moses the Ten Commandments. When the people came to Mount Sinai, it smoked. It was dark. There were earthquakes and lightnings. There were thunderings. And so much so that Moses said, I exceedingly feared and quaked. And if any beast touched the animal, touched the mountain, it would die. I mean, there was this image here of the holy God. And I mean, this is just a small essence, but holy God had come to earth. And that's what his presence did to that mountain. And it terrified even his own people as to what was going on here. And John, to John, the only scripture he has is the Old Testament. Now he has the other writings of the apostles, but to him the scripture is the Old Testament. And this imagery is from that time on Mount Sinai, and also the plagues that God sent upon the Egyptians as right before the Exodus. And we're going to look at that some in particular. Now the reason I mentioned that is to ask this. When the Israelites came before Mount Sinai, and it said that there was thundering and lightning, do you think that was real thunder and real lightning?
Yeah.
If you're awake, shake a bush. One way or the other. Okay. When it says that the mountain shook, do you think it really shook?
Earthquake, yes.
When it says there was smoke, do you think there was real smoke?
Yes.
Do you think the people were really scared?
Yes.
I think all of that. Well, when the plagues came upon Egypt and hail and fire came down, do you think that was real hail?
Man.
Real fire? Okay. So I agree. I think that all of those things, when the Bible makes mention of them in the Old Testament, really happened. Now I say that because now when we get to Revelation that has the same imagery, there are many commentators that say, now this is not real fire, and this is not real this, and this is not, this symbolizes this, and this symbolizes that. And it's funny how they'll say there's great disagreement on what it symbolizes, but they'll go back to the Old Testament saying that it was real smoke, it was real earthquake, it was real, but now this is not real, this is symbolic. I think it was real in the Old Testament, and I think it's going to be real in the future. You know, when events prove me wrong, then I'll say, nope, it's not real.
I
But
think that pillar of, that cloud that hovered over, I think that was real.
oh, I do too. I surely do. And the pillar of fire by night, you know, I don't understand it, but I believe it was real. They could see it and they could follow it. So just kind of wanted to set a little bit of the groundwork of how I see these things unfolding. And we mentioned this when we first started the book of Revelation. I think the simplest explanation is always the one you should go with first. Just take it literally for what it says. Now, if it says in the scripture that this is symbolism, and we're going to look at one of these trumpets tonight, is clearly symbolic. But it says there that it is. So unless the scripture clearly says it is, we need to take it as its word. And so, okay. We are at verse 7. And the first angel sounded, and there followed hail and fire, mingled with blood. And they were cast upon the earth, and the third part of trees were burnt up, and all green grass was burnt up. As the first angel sounds in this hail and fire, of course, this is directly related to one of the plagues upon Egypt. Who has Exodus 9:24 through 25? Okay, Brother Lynn.
So there was hail, fire mingled with the hail, very grievous, such as there was none like it in all the land of Egypt since it became a nation. And the hail smote through out all the land of Egypt, all that was in the field, both man and beast, and the hail smote every bird of the field and brake every tree of the field.
As a devastating hailstorm, devastating plague that God sent upon Egypt. In this plague, it says that 1/3 of the land burns, 1/3 of the trees burn, and all of the grass burns. That is beyond comprehension, is it not? That in the earth, that type of You know, we see these fires out west and how destructive they can be. So God's going to send fire, and it's 1/3 of the earth is going to be, the trees and the land and the grass will be burned. It'd be an awful thing to look outside and there's nothing but black ash everywhere you look. When the 7 seals were opened, and I mentioned that the first 4 seals were the 4 horsemen. The 4 horsemen were given control over 1/4 of the earth, 1/4 of humanity, of nature, and so they were given by war, by political unrest, by famine, and by plague. They were given the power to kill 25%, 1/4 of the earth, and cause this destruction. Now, with the opening of the trumpets, sounding of the trumpets, we say, well, now it has gone up to 1/3 of the earth. That's, the judgments are intensifying, and they will continue to intensify all the way until God is finished pouring out his wrath upon the earth. And so it's moved up from 1/4 to 1/3, and everything has been burned. Now it mentions something different in this, in the first trumpet than there was in the plague that God sent upon Egypt. What was different between this disaster and the disaster that occurred in Egypt?
Blood.
The blood. That's different. There was not blood mixed with the hail and the fire in the land of Egypt. Dennis?
Comment on blood. The word blood can mean literally blood out of somebody or animal, but it also could be the color red, like lava is red.
Mm-hmm.
But you got fire and red, so it could be that we see it over in Hawaii. You got
Right.
lava and you got fire, but like the big battle, Armageddon, said the blood was to the horse's bridle. Well, the commentary is that I've heard many times, is that the whole Jordan Valley will open up, and that fault that goes up through that valley will open up, and the lava will spew out of there. And it's just right, not very far down. If you look, got pictures of Negev Desert on the south, you've got piles of ash and sulfur and everything coming up all the time. But anyway,
And that's
the point.
that is true. The word, the Greek word for blood can be interchanged for the word red. And the Bible also there are also other words for red. And most of the time in the Bible, it is used for blood, like the blood of bulls and goats. And it's obvious that it's talking about blood that's coming out of our veins. And, there's no doubt that God cannot cause blood to fall, genuine blood to fall from the sky. But as Brother Dennis said, this can refer to the color red. And in the early 1900s, there was a storm all the way across the entire southern Europe where it rained red. And, it was known and talked about as raining blood. But what had happened is the sand in the Sahara Desert is iron rich. And in the dust storms, it got blown up and up and up into the atmosphere. And so the water condensed around those molecules, and when it come down, it rained red. But I don't know if that's what that's talking about or not. Possibilities. Now then, any other comment about that? Okay, verse 8. And the second angel sounded, and as it were a great mountain burning with fire was cast into the sea. And the third part of the sea became blood. And the third part of the creatures which were in the sea and had life died, and the third part of the ships were destroyed. So, John sees something as it were. So that tells us that what he sees is not exactly what he's describing. He's going to use this description to kind of relate to what he sees. So, did John see a mountain burning with fire cast into the sea? Because a lot of times that's what we'll hear said. Okay, John saw this mountain burning with fire cast into the sea. That's not what it says, is it? Is that what it says?
Something like.
He said, as it were, something like. So he doesn't see an actual mountain burning, thrown into the sea. He says it's something like. Now, one thing that we can say that he saw a mountain burning, what would that be? What would be a mountain on fire? A volcano. That'd be a mountain on fire. Well, we've already talked extensively about how the way that the Earth's geology is set up, that God already has in place everything he needs to bring about every bit of destruction that it calls for in Revelation. So he sees a mountain burning with fire as if it was cast into the sea. Well, if it's, what could it be saying here?
Like liquid, well, like he said, liquid lava. You know, it could be liquid going into the water.
Well, and I think that's what it is. In other words, John sees a place where there's no mountain, and then all of a sudden, there is a mountain, as if one had been cast into the sea. And so what he could be seeing is a massive volcanic eruption that continues to erupt and erupt and erupt until, and there are, in the Aegean Sea, there are, I think when Pompeii was destroyed, that a new mountain appeared, a new island appeared in the ocean? I think I've got that wrong.
But that's what forms mountains, is liquid rock. When it cools, the mountains form.
Well, we think,
Or vice
what kind of
versa.
volcano would it take to produce a mountain of lava in the ocean, an island where there was not one before? It'd take one of cataclysmic size. You know, we talked about what happened at the supervolcano in Yellowstone National Park. That's the kind of violence, earth violence, that it would take for this type of volcano to erupt, if that's what it is. And John says that it looks as though someone had cast a burning mountain into the sea. And the result is that 1/3 of the life in the sea dies. The sea is turned to blood, and 1/3 of sea life dies. Now, again, is there a natural answer to this? Is there a geological or a natural answer? And the answer to that is, yes, there is. There is a phenomenon known as a red tide. And a red tide is when there are certain microscopic algae in an area, because the conditions get right and that algae will just explode in growth. It will explode to the point that it kills the sea life within that red tide. And you can go online tonight when you get home and just type in red tide. They're common off the coast of Florida. And you can see pictures of it. And they're brownish, reddish, sir.
In Alabama too.
In Alabama too.
Red tide.
Yep, and in fact, Florida monitors the red tides constantly. It's just like monitoring the weather. They monitor them constantly because they don't want you to swim in a red tide. Some reports say that.
I know about these if I used to teach.
Pardon me?
I know about this because I used to teach
Oh, okay.
my class. Red tides, you're right about what they are. They monitor them, but the deal with red tides is they kill fish and other animals, but not shellfish. And so that's why you get sick sometimes when you eat clams, lobster, things like this that are shellfish. You know, how seafood will make people sick sometimes and not others. That's why they monitor them so closely. It's like, especially in Maine, a lot of times you'll see the beach signs up. You know, you're right, go swimming. They won't let the fishermen bring shellfish in during those times.
Okay. There are some reports I come across of people, not in America, but people in other countries dying from eating some of the, I guess it was shellfish that came, and maybe they had concentrations enough that they poisoned them, or, but there are cases of people dying from eating the fish, or not eating this, yeah. What'd you call them? Shellfish?
Shellfish.
Shellfish.
Yeah.
Like lobster, clams, mollusks, you know, anything that's mollusks. Also, you were talking about those volcanic islands. There's been several islands observed now by scientists as we've gotten more and more advanced, I guess. But, yeah, even the Ring of Fire, you know,
Mhm.
the famous volcanic, that's formed several islands. And even a couple of years ago, one was formed in Japan that they observed as formed at volcanic islands and that become land masses as they cool.
Hmm.
So that's
Yep. What do you understand causes a red tide?
It is, it's algae, it's a red algae. If I could have a brain, I could remember the name of it. But I think it's a species of Planktonomus, but I may be wrong.
Well, I won't hold you to that, but in my research,
It is, it's exactly what you said. And
Yeah.
it's out there all the time, but the blooms just get big enough to where it causes trouble sometimes.
Yeah.
It's a chemical they give off.
one of the things that I found very interesting when I was reading about what causes it is that it happens when the water temperature increases, when the trade winds bring warmer water into an area. So an increase of water temperature is conducive to that.
There's gonna be
And
a lot of heat involved in this whole thing.
in a volcano, yeah, it's all about fire. So the conditions are going to be perfect to set off a red tide. But here's what's really interesting. And this had nothing to do with what I'd been studying before. But in reading, one person said that one of the things that could set off a red tide would be a sudden influx of red oxide sand, such as the type of sand found in the Sahara Desert. And you know, this rainstorm that swept southern Europe that was called Blood was made up of this red oxide sand from the Sahara. And so if that kind of rain from the first trumpet happened to be dropped in the area where this volcano was erupting, then you've got two huge contributing factors in the same time that would set off a massive red tide. And you know, I look at that, I look at the maps and say, man, that wouldn't be enough to destroy a third of the sea line. But if it was large enough, my understanding is that they can continue until the factors change enough. They'll continue to spread until there's no longer a factor there that causes that algae to bloom. And if it was in a certain area of the ocean where the currents and trade winds took it, carried it across the Atlantic or across the Pacific, you could see how it could kill a third of the sea line. And, and it might not happen like that at all. But all I'm saying is that everything's already in place right now for these events to happen. It's just waiting on God's clock to tick down, and it's all set in motion. right now, we're gonna thank the Lord for rain and not hail mixed with fire, huh?
Yeah.
I tell you what, it's gonna be a tough place to be.
Daniel, I also found an interesting verse with this in Job 38. Yeah, 22 and 23.
You wanna read that?
Read it?
Yeah.
Okay. Hast thou entered into the treasures of the snow, or hast thou seen the treasures of the hail? And by the way, there's such a thing as red snow too. And which I have reserved against the time of trouble, against the day of battle and war.
Hmm.
Which to me, I have gone along with Revelation.
Yes, it could have. And also, Zephaniah, Sister Sabra, read that verse in Zephaniah, chapter 1, verse 3.
I will consume man and beast. I will consume the fowls of the heaven and the fish of the sea and the stumbling blocks of the wicked. And I will cut off man from off the land, saith the Lord.
Okay, so even in the Old Testament, God's promising that he's going to send these judgments, even against the fish of the sea. Who has Exodus 7:19 through 21? You have that, Sister Naomi?
I thought you said Exodus 9.
Exodus 7:19 through 21.
And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying unto Aaron, take the rod and stretch out thine hand on the waters of Egypt, upon their streams, upon their rivers, and upon their ponds, and upon all their pools of water, that they may become blood, and that there may be blood throughout all the land of Egypt, both in vessels of wood and in vessels of stone. That's through 19. Is that where it's-
Yes, ma'am. And that's, that's God's plague upon Egypt during the time before the Exodus.
Now, was that real blood?
I don't know, Brother Roy.
The Bible says it was.
It says blood.
That's good enough for me.
Yes, sir. Sure is. Any other comments up to this point?
With Daniel, I don't know if you have read about the Canary Islands over there toward Africa and Spain, sitting right outside that whole range of islands there are volcanic, and they have run what's called chutes all up there, and have created cones all along as the lava and the sea ran, and they're just almost split in half. And the thing is, they said that when that finally splits all the way, half of that's going to fall over to the west into the Atlantic, and when it does, it'll create a tsunami that will go and get, I forget, up to 1,000 feet when it hits the United States, probably go across Florida and hit New York City and everything. And they've been looking at that for a long time. But a lot of this disturbance in the ocean and all this creating all these tsunamis, there are 2/3 of the ships are out among the waters at any one time. 1/3 of ships are docked. And that's an explanation I've heard, that the reason those 1/3 get wiped out is because of all the tsunamis.
Yeah, because they're not really, they don't have any power until they reach shallow water. And as they reach shallow water, then they begin to pile up and gain their destructiveness. Yeah, that's for true. 1/3 of all the ships will be destroyed. Any other comments? All right, verse 10. And the third angel sounded, and there fell a great star from heaven, burning as it were a lamp, and it fell upon a third part of the rivers and upon the fountains of waters. And the name of the star is called Wormwood. And the third part of the waters became wormwood, and many men died of the waters because they were made bitter. Now there's really not a parallel to this trumpet found in the plagues that God sends upon Egypt. Here, John sees this blazing star, this like a torch blazing across the sky. Now, we can only assume that this is not a real star. Our sun is one of the smallest of all the stars, and if it struck the ground, there would be nothing left, of course. But, when you were a kid, did you ever hear anybody say, "Wish upon a star"?
Falling star.
Did they really? Anybody ever seen a falling star?
Meteors.
Not really. You've never seen a real falling star. Because we wouldn't be alive today if we had. But we see meteors, and that's what's called falling stars. And so John sees something in the air that he considers like a falling star. It hits the ground, and it poisons the freshwater systems of the earth. Now, again, this one's, who knows what this is? Some experts think that it could be a comet that has entered the Earth's atmosphere. Comets are not just made up of rock. Comets are made up of ice. And that as it would hit the Earth's atmosphere and go around the Earth, this ice would be melting and releasing the contents, the mineral contents that's within that ice onto the Earth. And so some scientists think that that's what this could be, is the releasing of the minerals and elements that are in a comet. Now it says that it's wormwood, named wormwood, and it makes the water bitter. We're familiar with bitter water from the Old Testament because the children of Israel murmured because of the bitter waters at Marah. But that water was bitter, but it wouldn't kill anyone. It wasn't poisonous to drink. It was just obnoxious to try to drink it. Kind of like any of you ever lived in a place where your water had sulfur content in it. It tasted terrible and it stunk. Well, you could drink it, but you didn't want to. That's kind of the way it was with the Israelites in the wilderness. But this water is not only going to be bitter, it's going to be poisonous. It says that many men are going to die from drinking the water. And so we see the different parts of elements of nature that are already being involved here. The land has been burnt, the sea has been affected, the fresh water has been affected. Because this star is named wormwood, I've read some commentators think that this is referring to Satan, which we're going to see a little bit later on in the book of Revelation, that Satan is cast down upon the earth, and the announcement goes out, "Woe unto the earth." So that they think that could be it. Notice chapter 9, just a little bit over, chapter 9, verse 1. It says, "And the fifth angel sounded, and I saw a star fall from heaven unto the earth, and to him was given the key of the bottomless pit." So obviously, this star is some creature or some man. It's a he, and to him's given the key to the bottomless pit. And because of that, some commentators think that this star, but I don't know how the water system gets poisoned by if this is a person, unless if it's Satan, of course, Satan could maybe curse the water, possibly. My 2 bits worth is that it is some type of celestial body that enters the Earth's atmosphere and releases some type of chemicals that poison the fresh water system. And And I'm leaving you plenty of room to disagree with me on any of these things. All right, any comment on that, on the third trumpet? Okay.
C.S. Lewis book, Screw Tape Letters, Wormwood is a junior demon.
Yeah. And it's hard to think of wormwood now without saying, oh, that's a demon. That's what wormwood is because of C.S. Lewis.
My comment says that wormwood symbolizes the bitterness that comes from sorrow and calamity.
Yes, sir. And that is, and that theme, if you take the route that these events are symbolic, for instance, many commentators, they don't believe there's going to be an actual hailstone and fire fall upon the earth. They think that is political unrest, that God cast out political unrest, and that the trees represent leaders of the earth, and the grass represents people, and that when God sends this great political upheaval, then it's going to disrupt all the leadership of the world and cause it to be difficult on all of mankind. And so these themes go all the way through these, that it's political unrest, that it's spiritual unrest, that it's not actual events that are happening. And, and they give good arguments that it's symbolic. But I go back to my original, and I was taught to interpret the Bible, to take it literally unless it was obviously otherwise. Like we know this is not an actual star that hits the earth.
It says as a star. I mean, when you read that, it said as a star.
On which part, Sister Naomi?
I think it was right up here. And the third angel sounded, and there fell a great star from heaven, burning as if it was a lamp. No, that wasn't it.
It was as if it were a lamp. And so
But this
what?
here says the name of the star is called Wormwood. But I thought it said as a,
Well, it says as a lamp, and so Paul is saying this was not an actual torch going across, but whatever it was burning like a torch as it went across, fell from the sky. Any other comments? Okay, verse 12, and the fourth angel sounded, and the third part of the sun was smitten, and the third part of the moon, and the third part of the stars, so that the third part of them was darkened, and the day shone not for a third part of it, and the night likewise. And so this affects the celestial bodies, and it's by them being darkened. And we've already talked about this when we were looking at the sixth seal being opened, that these worldwide volcanic events, or even one event, like if the super volcano in Yellowstone National Park were to erupt, it would spew enough ash itself into the sky that it would darken the sky. This volcano, that if it is a volcano that John sees that appears in the earth, it's probably not going to be alone. It's probably causing, the tectonic plates are shifting to a degree that the atmosphere is going to be affected by the thick ash that's there, to the point that the day will be shortened by 1/3. You farmers, what would that do to crop life for the day to lose 33% of its sunshine?
Devastated.
And even what it does shine is going to be dark. And so you're going to have 2/3 of daylight with dark skies. Sherry, what was the landscape in Alaska when it got like that?
We got dark,
Yeah,
dark.
ice. Ice everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
And this would lower the temperature of the earth. It
Be a
would,
decrease in temperature, for sure.
yep, it's a decrease in, I mean,
That's the reason it's so cold, because the earth doesn't have a chance to warm up, because there's not enough daylight.
yeah, and well, every night, what does it drop? 20 degrees at night? I mean, what if the sun can't get through to warm the earth back up in the day? What's gonna happen to the temperature?
Drop probably 60 degrees.
You know, here fires come down and burned all the grass up, third of the trees, third of the land, and now all of a sudden it's wintertime, getting colder and colder.
When Mount, I'm going blank, in Washington,
St. Helens?
St.
St.
Helens,
Helens.
yeah.
ruptured, Louise Webb, you know, used to live here, you know who she is, but she's right across the street here. They lived near there, and she told me they were 100 miles away. And she said they'd come out of the church, and it was as bright as day, you know, it was bright, it was like 6 o'clock. No, I don't know what time it was. Anyway, she said it was very bright. And when that erupted and when the ash got to them, she said it was like almost dark, you know. And she said like inches of ash covered their cars in just a few seconds, you know. She said it was a really scary feeling.
It would be, and it'd be terrifying. When you see every one of these events, I mean, from the time that God has started, these events are events that would strike terror into people's hearts. I'm telling you, it's funny because people are going to have to start thinking this is the end of time, but they're still not going to praise God. They're not going to repent. They're not going to give God glory.
They'll have a scientific reason.
Well, they will.
Or try to
look at these
find
things and say, well, this is just happening. It'll all settle down.
Global warming or,
It will be global warming.
And there'll probably be Democrats in office then, so they'll blame them. Well, there'll be Republicans and they'll blame them. You know,
When they talk about nuclear winter, it's like that.
Yeah.
It's not by the nuclear radiation, it's by the darkening of the sun. that
Yes,
causes
sir.
nuclear winter.
it is. Have you ever heard anyone say that we're living in the tribulation period right now? Y'all ever heard anybody say that? There are a lot of people that think we are. When you read these events,
No,
we're
we're
not
not.
in the tribulation period. No,
Well, we got samples, but there's nothing like what's going to be.
exactly.
We have days like that, don't
We have days we think that. We think we're in tribulation for sure. All right, any other comments? Okay, for our prayer request tonight, remember Brother Matt Hudson in your prayers.